Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this, our seventh webinar tonight on the fascinating country that is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And what's wonderful, and perhaps just a little bit surprising, possibly, is the interest that we've seen in tonight's talk, and to see how many of you have tuned in to watch it. As I say, this is the seventh webinar that we've done since the summer. We've done them on places as diverse as the Silk Road, Pakistan, the Caucasus. The last one was on Central America, but we've never had quite as many people as there are on here tonight, which is great. So welcome all of you, wherever you are. I know we've got people in the States, we've got people in Europe, obviously, we've got people in Asia. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. You're all very welcome. And I hope that during these troubled times, you're all keeping safe and well. So my name's Johnny Bealby. I founded Wild Frontiers just over, in fact, 20 years ago, after 3 big adventures. And I'm just going to share my screen to give you a little bit of information about those times. So yeah, I rode a motorbike right the way around the African continent back in 91, 92. I walked through parts of India, Pakistan and Afghanistan in 96, 97. And I then rode a horse along the Silk Road, 3,000 miles back in 1999. These culminated in my 3 travel books, Running with the Moon, about the motorcycle journey, For a Pagan Song, about the journey through Afghanistan, and Silk Dreams, Troubled Road, about the horse riding journey along the Silk Road. Now, for those of you that have watched our webinars before, you will know that I normally take a fairly central role in talking about the countries that we are talking about on the webinar. But tonight, I have to say that I have a rather more luxurious position, because even though I have spent quite a lot of my traveling life in the Middle East, and it's an area that I absolutely love. These are pictures of me in Lebanon, Jordan, Oman, but I've also traveled in places like Syria, Iran, and a lot of North Africa. And I find it one of the most fascinating parts of the world. But I have never been to Saudi Arabia, and I suspect neither have a good deal of you watching tonight. And I think that's maybe why it's so interesting, because of course it's not that often that countries as well known as Saudi Arabia suddenly decide to open their doors to tourism, a country that's been really pretty closed for a long time. But luckily, I know a man who does know about Saudi Arabia. He is Marc Leaderman. He is our Director of Product and Operations, and he traveled out there in January. Just a quick little anecdote about that. On January the 8th, he walked past my office and he said, "Right, Johnny, I'm just off to Heathrow. By the way, I've just heard there's a little virus or something happening in China. Shouldn't amount to much, but keep an eye on it and we'll see what happens when I get back." How the world has changed since then. Anyway, Marc was lucky enough to go to Saudi Arabia, and I am going to hand over to him in a minute. But before I do, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. So Marc's going to talk for about 40 minutes. Then we should have 15 minutes for Q&As. I've already received a couple of really good questions, but if you have any thoughts or you have any questions while the webinar is going on, please just use the Q&A button, which you can see at the top of your screens. If we don't get round to answering your questions, don't worry, we'll make a note and we will email you the answers tomorrow. We're also recording this webinar. Again, we will send a copy of this out to you all tomorrow. So if you need to dash off, or you want to share it with friends, or you just want to watch it again, you will be able to. We will make sure we send it out to you. So there you are. Without further ado, I am going to stop sharing my screen and let Marc take over. Over to you, Marc.
Thanks, Johnny. So good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. As Johnny said, I was indeed very fortunate to have the opportunity to travel to Saudi in January of this year. Now, like Johnny, I traveled quite extensively in the Middle East before. I'd been to Jordan, I'd been to Oman, I'd been to Iran, I'd been to Yemen, I'd been to Iraq, but I'd never had the opportunity to travel to Saudi, partly because it was a closed country. So as soon as I had the opportunity, I jumped to it. So I'm just going to try and share my screen and see how this goes. Okay, so when it comes to talking about Saudi Arabia, it's a country which is 3 times the size of Texas and 9 times the size of the UK. It is huge, and it can be hard to know really where to start. So I thought I should start by addressing the metaphorical elephant in the room. For while it's true that when we launched Saudi Arabia for the first time, it became our quickest selling destination ever. From a tour operator's perspective, this was the Instagram equivalent of David Attenborough, or more recently Rupert Grint, getting to 1 million followers in just 4 hours. It was also the destination that not only did it sell well, it also prompted the largest number of emails and telephone calls from clients questioning the ethics of traveling to a destination with such a poor human rights record. And when it comes to human rights in Saudi Arabia, take your pick. You've got the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. You've got its treatment of women. You've got the imprisonment of Saudi prominent people at the Ritz-Carlton. And you've got the ongoing war with Yemen. Saudi is a controversial country, and travel to controversial countries can be difficult, and it does raise a lot of questions, and it can sometimes leave you and us confused as to what the right thing is to do. And I'm not here today to try and tell anyone what I think they should or shouldn't do, but all I want to do is just to share with you our approach, our motivation, our rationale behind offering destinations such as Saudi Arabia, and it really falls largely into 3 areas. The firstly is that by going to a country and meeting the people there is not the same as endorsing the policies of the government. And I remember very, very clearly 20 years ago being in Iran, and I had an American with me on the trip, and we were chatting to a couple of locals, and this American was from New York and had quite a strong accent. And he said to the Iranian, he said, I'm from New York. He said, is that a problem? And the Iranian looked at him and said, why on earth would that be a problem? You're a guest in my country. He said, oh, don't get me wrong. He said, I'm not a big fan of American foreign policy. He said, but why on earth would I judge you according to the actions of your government? And then almost with horror, he said, oh my God, please don't tell me that you judge me according to the actions of my government. And that always stuck with me. And so really, we are engaged with the issues, we're fascinated by the issues, but we're not a political organization. Secondly, we found that countries rarely make it into the news for good reasons. That doesn't mean that bad stuff doesn't happen or that it's all fake news, far from it. But what we found is that often the reality is much more complex and much more nuanced than you might be led to believe if your only interaction with that country is through the media. And we believe that by going to a country and experience the reality of being there and meeting people can sometimes really challenge perceptions, which we think is a really good thing. And lastly, it's the fact that tourism, if done well, can really help to break down barriers. And by taking someone from Basingstoke and introducing them to someone from Buraydah, and allowing them the time to talk, to chat, to agree, to disagree, to exchange ideas can really be a way forward. And in the case of Saudi Arabia and tourism in particular, it's worth bearing in mind that while the cliched image of rich Saudis hiring a private jet and flying off to the south of France for a month to take over an entire wing of a 5-star hotel does exist, for the vast majority of Saudis, who number 33 million, it's not like that at all. And just by working with people as drivers, as guides, as in restaurants and as helpers, we hope to be able to put money into normal people's pockets. At the end of the day, travel will always be a personal choice. And I hope that regardless whether you decide to travel to Saudi or not, that this evening will be of interest and of use to you regardless. So back to the topic in hand, Saudi Arabia. Now, because Saudi Arabia is such a, I'd say, relatively misunderstood and unknown country, I just want to take you through a brief summary of how Saudi Arabia went from being a desert backwater to being one of the richest and most important countries in the world today. And really that history starts with a tree and one of the most expensive natural products ever, which is the crystallized sap of the frankincense tree. Now, these trees grow in very few parts of the world, predominantly in Oman and Yemen. And this formed part of the spice trade where frankincense was taken along the blue line that you can see here, up from Yemen and Oman, along through a region known as the Hejaz, which is the eastern part of the Arabian Peninsula, all the way up to Medina that you can see, and finally up to Damascus, where you can see it then hit the Silk Road in pink, and it could go left or right, east or west, either towards Europe or towards Asia. And this was the predominant kind of wealth-making exercise of the region for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. And the people that inhabited the Arabian Peninsula and the lands that make up Saudi Arabia at the time were almost exclusively Bedouin Arabs, very tribal, and they made their living by really one of three ways. Firstly, they had goats and camels, and they would live off of the products of goats and camels and live quite simple lives of subsistence, going from oasis to oasis, grazing their cattle. They also started to make very good money when the spice trade really took off by organizing caravans to take the spices from Oman and Yemen up to Damascus and beyond. And the third way in which they made money was by raiding the caravans of other people that were organizing the spices and take them up. So those were the three main ways in which the Bedouin Arabs would make their living. As I'm sure you all know, that all changed a lot in the year 622, when the Prophet Muhammad fled from his home in Mecca to Medina. Over the next 8 years, he built up his power base, and when he returned to Mecca 8 years later, he started an empire which has changed the world. Interestingly, when he died 2 years later in the year 632, what you're seeing on this map, everything in red, that was the area that was controlled by the Islamic forces. But just 10 years later, the entire focus had shifted away from the Arab Peninsula. It went first to Damascus under the Umayyad dynasty, and then later it went to Baghdad under the Abbasid dynasty. And really, for the next 1,000 years, Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula and many parts of it, was a little bit of a desert backwater again. Obviously, the exception to that rule was Mecca. Mecca always had and always and still retains this importance for Muslims. It forms visiting Mecca for pilgrimage, forms one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So people would always travel from Syria, what is today Syria and Iraq, down to Mecca, but it was never the center of the Islamic Empire at the time. Getting into more modern history and getting into the rise of the Al-Saud family, and this is the family who gave their name to today's Saudi Arabia, we jump forward in time to the 18th century. Now, this is a time when it was the Ottoman Empire that controlled that key Hejaz region of Arabia that you can see here on the map. Now, the Ottomans were foreign, they were often viewed as decadent, and they were non-Arab. This meant that amongst the Al-Saud family and a lot of the other tribes in the region, they were none too popular. Into this arena comes a man called Muhammad ibn Wahhab. Now, he started to preach a purification of Islam and a return to the values of 7th century Islam. His form of Islam, his view, you've probably heard spoken of today, named after him as Wahhabism. And he's going to be key to the rise of Saudi Arabia and the Saud family. So he started to preach, he managed to convert a local sheikh, and they started to get a little bit of power, but he went a little bit too quickly and he started to make some enemies. So he had to flee for his life. Now, where he chose to go made a difference to the region that changed really the entire world. He went to this place. It's a place called Diraya. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site today. It sits about 25 kilometers outside of Riyadh. It was the ancestral home of a local emir whose name was Al Saud. So this was the first time that the Saud family met with Wahab, and they gave each other legitimacy. The Saud gave political protection to Wahab, and Wahab gave religious autonomy to Saud, and the two formed almost an inseparable bond that helped them grow in power. The closest connection that I've read about that we can maybe understand maybe in Europe would be the connection between the Holy Roman Emperors and the Pope. Again, each one, power and religion, playing a pivotal role in each other's lives. But cultural heathen that I'm often accused of being, I just prefer to see it as just a partnership where both sides brought different things to it, almost Lennon and McCartney-esque in the way that it worked. And gradually, the Saud-Wahab partnership grew through their descendants and really fed off of this anti-Ottoman sentiment. Now, we jump forward in time to the early part of the 19th century. And in the 19th century, early 19th century, the Saud-Wahab partnership took Mecca. And this made them heroes in the eyes of the Arab tribes. They kicked the non-Arab invaders out of Mecca, and they were held as heroes. But just 20 years later, the Ottomans took Mecca back, and the Saud family was exiled, and that was my picture to show that they almost turned into one-hit wonders along the lines of 1991's Chesney Hawks. But they weren't to go forever. And at the very, very beginning of the 20th century, and this is now we're getting into very relevant history, in 1902, a descendant of the Saud family decided that it was time to retake power. And he went to the main fortress in the region, in Riyadh, this place that you can see here called Mazmak Fortress, and with less than 100 men, he took the fortress. He then worked together with the British in Lawrence of Arabia, and finally they kicked the Ottomans out of Arabia. They retook Mecca again, and he declared himself as ruler of the land which he renamed the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and his name was Abdulaziz. And Abdulaziz is the current king's father. Now, in 1932, when he came to power, Saudi Arabia was not the wealthy country that we think of it as today. Most of its revenue, ironically, came from tourism, albeit religious tourism, for people going to Mecca and maybe for some local taxes, but it was not a wealthy place. But the very next year, in 1933, Abdulaziz signed his first oil concession. And 4 years later, he founded with America the Arab-American Oil Corporation, Aramco, a company which today is worth just under $2 trillion. Now, Abdulaziz had 34 sons. And after his death in 1953, power went to one of his sons, and since then has gone from brother to brother to brother to brother. And depending on your age, depending on your era, some of these may be more familiar to you than others. There was Saud, there was Faisal, there was Khalid, Fahd, Abdullah, and Salman, the current king. Now, when Salman came to power in 2015, he was 79 years old. And as a consequence, he decided to give almost all of his power to one of his sons, who became the crown prince and the effective ruler of the country. His name, as you probably know, is Mohammed bin Salman, and he's affectionately known, or commonly known, as MBS. Now, over the period that the Saudis have been in charge of Saudi Arabia, leaders have approached the country differently, and it's often been described like a pendulum. Some have been more liberal and more progressive than others. Others have been much more conservative. But you can't go too far this way without incurring the wrath of the others. And this is the way that Saudi Arabia has gone over the last few decades, at times looking to the West, looking to progress, looking to move things forward, but they go too quickly, too far this way. They incur wrath, they incur problems from the religious side, so they start to clamp down, then they go the other way. Then they get criticized by the West, by the young, so they start to come back. And this is really taking us up to Saudi Arabia where it is today. The current leader, MBS, is a controversial figure. He's the one behind Khashoggi, he's the one behind the Ritz-Carlton, he's the one behind the war in Yemen, but he is seen as a reformer. He has publicly said that he wants Saudi Arabia to return to a moderate form of Islam. Praying 5 times a day, which used to be a legal requirement, is no longer a legal requirement. He has said it's a personal choice. And the religious police that used to police things like praying 5 times a day and various other things, the Mutawa, he's disbanded. He's retired them, he's given them pensions and basically told them they are no longer needed in his kingdom. And when it comes to women, yes, women can now drive. Women no longer need to wear headscarves, niqabs or abayas, and they no longer need a male guardian in order to leave the home. As one journalist said, this is hardly bra burning in 1960s San Francisco, but it is a step in the right direction. And more critically for our purposes, he's behind what's known as Vision 2030. Now, this is a 14-year plan started in 2016. It's a multi-billion-dollar plan to diversify the economy away from oil. Saudi Arabia is still the world's 2nd largest supplier of oil, and oil represents 90% of Saudi Arabia's exports. But this brings with it problems. One, the price of oil fluctuates heavily, which causes havoc with the Saudi economy. Secondly, it is a finite resource, and they're very aware of that. And thirdly, finally, we do seem to be in a world which is pivoting away from its complete dependence on oil, and hopefully sooner rather than later, oil will not be needed in the same quantities that it is at the moment. You combine that with a population of which 2/3 is under the age of 30, and unlike other countries that you might associate Saudi Arabia with, social media is prevalent. Facebook, Twitter are all there. So you have a very young, a very engaged young audience. And this is all driving the change that is leading to Saudi Arabia being the country that it is today. And it's also the reason why I was able to go there. For years, Saudi Arabia was closed to tourists. You could go if you had a religious visa, if you were doing a pilgrimage to Mecca or Medina, and you could go if you had a work permit. You're one of the 10 million expats working in Saudi, but if you just wanted to go and see the country, it didn't exist. I got a visa back in January, and unlike some of you, if any of you have been to Iran or other countries, Turkmenistan, you might think, oh, is it going to be a nightmare visa? It's the easiest visa ever. It's an e-visa. Mine came through in less than 24 hours. It was about $120. This e-visa is open to 49 nationalities, and it's valid for visits of up to 19 days. It was very nice and easy compared to other destinations that we may have. So that's kind of the background, and this is the trip that we are offering. It's called the Inside Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It's 11 days long, and it generally runs from October to March. And it really focuses in on 3 main areas. It starts in Jeddah, which is the commercial capital. It goes up to the region of Al-Ulah, which is considered the heritage capital, and it finishes in Riyadh, the political capital. And it's an overland route linking those 3 centres and picking up a really varied, fascinating sites en route. So, should you decide to travel to the kingdom, this is what you will see. Starting in Jeddah, Jeddah has always been a gateway city. It's been the gateway to Mecca for centuries. And it is a vibrant city, and it is seen as a very liberal city, probably one of the most liberal cities in the country. And one of the things that surprised me about Jeddah and Saudi Arabia in general was the importance that it gave to art. And what you have here in Jeddah is along the Red Sea, there's a corniche walkway that lasts for about 30 kilometers. And along it, you've got various stunning sculptures, some of them quite traditional, some of them more modern, some of them quite avant-garde. And it's a fascinating place just to go for a wander, usually in the early afternoon, late evening, and see other locals kind of wandering along. And one of the iconic sites of Jeddah is the Floating Mosque, which juts out from the Corniche into the Red Sea itself. But I would say probably the highlight of Jeddah is its old town. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's called Al-Balad. And here you'll find Ottoman era and earlier houses, mosques, and some of those houses have been converted into art museums where you'll have rooms dedicated, beautifully decorated and exhibiting really some of the amazing artifacts from the last 1500 years of predominantly Islamic history in the region. Some of the houses are incredibly well restored and look beautiful. Others are in more rundown states. And this is a project. This is going to be going on for years, possibly even decades, gradually going through and restoring this quite fascinating old town. And some of the buildings you'll be able to see were actually built with coral bricks, which is really fascinating. And again, with this idea of art, it pervades the entire old city. You're wandering along and you'll find, on the sides of walls, you'll find beautiful murals, you'll find works of art. There are schools everywhere. And again, I have to say, this really surprised me. It just wasn't what I was expecting from Jeddah. There are some wonderful cafes that you can go and drink in. Then you've obviously got the main souk area where you can get pretty much everything. And it's just a really fascinating place. There are bookstores, and we went in there, we spent quite a long time here. They had some old National Geographic magazines going right the way back to the 1930s. There were some books on T. Lawrence, and again, the owner was very, very proud and very happy just to share his collection with us. And it's one of those old cities that's not so small that you're finished in half an hour, but it's not so big that you're going to get stranded in it for days. It's a really nice size, and it was a really friendly way to be able to meet people, lots of narrow lanes, people living there. It's a vibrant place. So that absolutely, I would say, is a highlight of Jeddah, and probably I would say of really Saudi Arabia and the Middle East as a whole. From there, we head inland, bypassing Mecca. As you probably know, non-Muslims are not allowed to go to Mecca. And we go up to a place called Taif, which is up in the mountains. And this is seen as the summer capital. And it's known for rose production, especially in the summer. And from there, we went to a place which was actually one of my favorites. It's called the Waba Crater. It was created by a volcanic explosion. It's over 1 kilometer wide. It's about 200 meters deep, and it was just really nice just to take. There was no one else there to do a really nice walk. It wasn't that challenging. It was about 2.5 hours there and back, and you could go right the way down to the center, which was all this dried up salt lake. And for those that don't want to walk in, you can stay around the perimeter. And it was just a really beautiful, literally in the middle of nowhere place that in another country, you'd probably have hotels and helicopter pads and airports all around. Here, there was practically no one. It was great. From there, we head on to Medina. So as you'll remember, this is the place that Muhammad fled to in 622, and Medina is home to the second largest mosque in the world. It's the Prophet's Mosque, and it can supposedly hold 1 million pilgrims, second only to the mosque in Mecca, which can supposedly hold up to 4 million people. Now, this is where, excuse me while I just take some water. This is where things get really interesting when it comes to Saudi Arabia today and the pace of change in the country. Around the mosque in, sorry, I'm having something come off my screen. Around the Medina, there are 3 ring roads. And traditionally, non-Muslims were not allowed inside the 3rd ring road. But that's all changed now. The only problem is no one knows exactly how far non-Muslims can go. Is it the 2nd ring road? Is it the 1st ring road? We asked so many people, and I was there in January. I'm still asking. No one really knows. And this is partly because there are so many competing authorities And what the national government may say may be different from what the local mayor may say, may be different from what the tourism board may say, and actually trying to get a comprehensive answer on so many things is challenging. All I will say is that I got to within about 100 meters of the mosque and I thought, that's close enough. No one questioned me. It was great, and it was fascinating just seeing kind of people going about their business, many people just using the mosque, again, not as a pilgrimage, but just as their local mosque. So, leaving Medina, we will then be following the route of the Hejaz Railway north from Medina. Now, the Hejaz Railway was built by the Ottomans, and it was designed to extend from Damascus all the way down to Mecca in order predominantly to aid pilgrims in getting to Mecca. There was probably also some strategic element to it, but that was at least the published motive. And between the years 1900 and 1908, 1,600 kilometers of railway was built all the way from Damascus to Medina, but it never got any further. And the main reason for this is that it being this flagship project for the Ottomans meant that it was a target by the Arabs, who, as we've heard, none too happy with their Ottoman leadership. So they started to attack it, to destroy it, and ultimately, with the help of the British during World War I, basically laid it to ruins, and it's never been restored. And effectively, as we travel up, you will find vestiges of it. You'll find bits of track, you'll find some dismantled parts of trains as we move forward north. Now, one of the major stops on the Hejaz Railway was Al-Ulah. Now, Al-Ulah is the heritage capital of Saudi Arabia, sitting in the northwest of the country. It sits in a very fertile strategic oasis, and there are so many different things around here that I know with time the Saudis are hoping that people may come here and may spend the better part of a week just around the whole Al-Ulah area. First of all, you've got the Old Town. And the Old Town has been continuously inhabited since the 12th century, right the way up until 1980. The Old Town predominantly served as a way station for pilgrims going from Damascus all the way down to Mecca. And although it's being restored because it's fallen into ruin, you will find here over 900 buildings, 400 shops and houses, and it's gradually being restored to its former glory. But the history of Al-Ulah goes back much further than the 12th century. As far back as the first millennium BC, it was a capital called Jeddah of the Leonite kingdom, and one of the most famous parts of the kingdom are these lion tombs, which date back 3,000 years. And very near to the lion tombs, you'll find a place called Jebel Ikmar. Now, this is an area where you will find rock inscriptions. There's about 500 rocks written in over 10 different languages, many of them predating Arabic, and it's termed as an open air library, and it's still being studied by scholars as they attempt to translate some of these proto-Arabic languages. But really, the icing on the cake of the whole region is an area known as Hejaz, but you may have heard it referred to as Medina Salah. Now, for anyone that's been to Petra in Jordan, you'll undoubtedly recognize the architecture here because it was built by the same people. It was built by the Nabateans. Petra was their capital. Medina Salah, Hejaz, was their second city. And the time of the Nabateans is really the 1st century BC to about the 1st century AD. That's the period in which they flourished, making their money, again, from the spice trade. And while Petra may be larger, Petra may be better known, Petra also has many, many more visitors than Hejaz does. They both have a Sikh, and one of the things that Hejaz has above Petra is it has actually more and more ornately decorated tombs. It's got the better part of 100 very beautifully, very, very, very stunningly decorated tombs, and it's a real joy just to wander around and enjoy this place. And like with Petra, you'll see how the Nabateans used water and manipulated water in order to make this their second city. It's a very, very special place, and probably my favorite place there is this place called Qasr Farid, which at sunset really just catches the colors of the sun, and it felt like a really magical place, and I felt very, very privileged. And I do honestly think that this will be one of those destinations that in 10, 20 years time, people will just know about in the same way that people know about Machu Picchu or Angkor Wat. I do feel it does have the ability to turn into one of those must-see sites. But that's not all. The region itself is just strewn full of beautiful rock formations. This is a rock called Elephant Rock. In the evening when I was there, they turned it into like a cafe in the evening. It was a nice place just to sit, meet locals, chat, have some coffee. And the entire area where you'll find Al-Ulah is really pretty striking high altitude desert. I mean, I've been to Jeddah, I've been to Wadi Rum, I've been to desert elsewhere, but I was really blown away with what I saw here. It really is quite special. And one of the regions that we explored were called the Rakasat Mountains, full of these deep canyons where there were wild camels all around. We explored it partly by four-wheel drive, partly on foot, and it was great. It just felt, again, very, very magical to be able to take advantage of the really lack of other visitors. Now, slightly bizarrely, I was also there at the time of what's called the Tantora Winter Festival. It was only the second one. And again, linking in with this artistic heritage, a lot of the rock formations were home to artistic installations, lighting shows, and it's a big thing that runs kind of every weekend over the winter. But slightly bizarrely, and in my mind, I almost felt that it was unnecessary. There were pop-up Michelin-starred restaurants just in the middle of caves and places all the way over the valley. There were private members clubs that suddenly had again done a little pop-up there. And maybe the bizarrest of all is this place called the Moriah, which apparently is the largest glass-tiled building in the world, in the middle of the desert, which is an arts and exhibition center, which the Saudis are trying to turn into this kind of major events venue. It's very exclusive. It only holds 550 people, so it's not a Wembley Arena, it's not a Madison Square Garden. It's very exclusive, and slightly oddly, but very enjoyably, I got to see Jamiroquai perform live at the Moriah in the middle of the Saudi desert. And on other weekends, you could have seen Lionel Richie, Andrea Bocelli, and Sister Sledge. So there you go. Slightly odd festival, but there you go. It was an exciting time to be there. And watching Jamiroquai and looking around the audience, and there were a few Westerners, but it was predominantly locals, and seeing kind of Saudi men and women all dancing, regardless of whether or not they were wearing, traditional gear or Western gear. It just felt like a real time of change and a really exciting change. Anyway, moving on from Al-Ulah and Jamiroquai, we then carry on this trip to another UNESCO World Heritage Site, this time a place called Juba. And this has got some of the world's best petroglyphs. They go back 7,500 years to this time when it was an inland lake, and you'll find depictions of oryx, of ibex, of camels, and again, a very, very special place. From here, we then continue on to a place called Buraydah, surrounded by date plantations and supposedly home to one of the world's largest, if not the largest, date plantation, date souk. Not just dates, they also have a camel market there, which we plan to visit. And camels, although most Saudis these days don't live as Bedouin. There are still some Bedouin who will still live with their camels and their goats. Camels are still highly prized. They are raced and they are very expensive. So it's quite a fascinating thing to go and see. From there, we drive via a heritage village called Ushaika before finally ending up in Riyadh, which is a sprawling metropolis which is building a metro at the moment, which apparently will become one of the world's largest urban rail projects ever. And Riyadh itself has got a handful of some really interesting sites. Yes, you have the Mazmak Fortress. So this, if you remember, this is the fortress that Abdulaziz, the founder of the current Saudi family, he took with less than 100 men in 1902 and really gave birth to the Saudi nation as it is today. And inside it's been restored beautifully, turned into a museum to really commemorate their history, but also again with this artistic side, beautifully decorated with woodwork, with paintings, and it's a great place to visit. Again, just on the outsides of Riyadh, you have Diraya, the ancestral home of the Saudi family, being restored now, again, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And this place I loved. It was only about an hour outside Riyadh, but it's called the Edge of the World. And it really is. And I thought having, come from Al-Ulah with the beautiful desert scenery, going to another place, what was the point? But it really was spectacular. And the sun sets directly in the west from here as you're looking out onto it. And it was a very, very special place to go and share that with the few locals that were there as well. So that is effectively the 11-day trip. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about what else there is in Saudi and maybe some of the things that I didn't include on the tour. And one of the questions that we get asked a lot is, what about the south of the country? Now, the south of the country is quite different from the areas visited on the tour. It's nearer to Yemen. It shares some association with Yemen. Scenery-wise, you'll see more mountains, but there were really, I would say, three main reasons why I didn't include the south in the tour. One, at the time when it's a good time to go and visit the north, which is generally October through to March or April, the south is notoriously erratic with weather. And while you might have a beautiful sunshine, within seconds, it can turn and you'll get zero visibility due to fog. And I was told that you can have a week of zero visibility. Now, I was there, I saw it come, I maybe had zero visibility for a few hours at a time, and then it would be clear, it would be great, but it would be quite a challenge to include as part of a group tour because zero visibility really was zero visibility. Secondly, your gateway city to the south, I've rung it here in red, is Abba. Now, while Abba and the surrounding areas itself are all considered safe, Abba Airport, which really is kind of the key to accessing the south, is used both for domestic but also for military purposes. And as a consequence of that, it has sometimes been bombed from Yemen. So there are some concerns regarding security of going to Abba Airport. And thirdly, because there isn't really much tourism in Saudi Arabia, most of the people that go to Abba and the south are Saudis. And they only really go there in the summer when they're trying to escape the heat from the north. And so a lot of the places were kind of closed. And so I enjoyed it, I loved it, and I'll show you some of the pictures, but at the moment it's a little bit tricky. So I would say, watch this space. Maybe with time we'll be able to develop a tour that maybe runs in the summer, which focuses exclusively on the south of the country. And I'd love to do more there, but for the time being, just bear those things in mind if you are interested about the south. And what I saw when the weather cleared is, it's amazing. You've got the Asir Mountains, which go between 2,000 and 3,000 meters. And in some of these mountain ranges, you will find so-called hanging villages. And these date back hundreds of years to when they were trying to escape the Ottomans. And they were only, this one here is called Hejaz, and it was only accessed via a rope. So that basically they could protect themselves from the Ottomans. It's abandoned today. And again, I couldn't visit because it's only visitable in the summer, but it was quite fascinating just to see the location of it. And then there are some stunning places. This is a place called Ziain, which is a restored 8th century fortified village. Again, those of you that may have had the opportunity, lucky enough to go to Yemen before the Arab Spring and the war, will know that there are similar places to be seen in Yemen. And then there's the place called Rijalma, which dates back to the 8th century, full of merchant houses, again, maybe more reminiscent of its neighbour, in Yemen. And throughout the region, you'll find, again, quite distinctive fortified architecture. And these date back, again, to the early days of the kingdom. And I haven't even touched on the empty quarter. I mean, the empty quarter is the size of France. And I know some people will probably be interested in exploring it. I have started some preliminary conversations. All I would say is not yet. And if you want to visit the empty quarter, go to Oman. Oman has a nice slice of the empty quarter. It's more easily accessible and it is fantastic. Speak to Johnny, he was there just a couple of years ago and absolutely loved it. So it's definitely possible to do, but I would say for Saudi at the moment, not yet. So that's a kind of things to see and do in Saudi. Now a few kind of practical, what's it really like? So accommodation wise, yes, you can stay at the Ritz-Carlton. It's no longer a prison. So you can stay there if you want to. But it's worth bearing in mind that Saudi's vision of tourism development for the future is not to try and recreate Dubai, not to try and recreate Egypt. They have their own vision, and it is a very high-level, boutique, eco-friendly vision of the future. So in places where there is no infrastructure, for example, like Al-Ulah, there are projects over the next few years from the Amman Group and from the Four Seasons to build very restrained resorts in the area. This is the direction that it's going. From a practical point of view at the moment, and honestly, from a group tour perspective, we are generally going to be staying in well-located, very comfortable 3- and 4-star hotels. And in Al-Ulah, we can stay in a fixed camp with private facilities, but very much it is practical and comfortable rather than the likes of Amman and various other, which are just not really suitable for group tours. Another question which we get asked a lot is, can I do a tailor-made in Saudi Arabia? Some of you that will know Wild Frontiers, you'll know that as a company, 50% of our business is small group tours, 50% is tailor-made. At the moment, though, I have to say Saudi Arabia is not ready for tailor-made. These were two of my lovely guides, Adnan and Lena. Absolutely lovely, great fun to be with, but they're not yet ready to take tailor-made people around Saudi Arabia. And this is partly that because when change, which is happening so quickly in Saudi Arabia, came, almost overnight, they promoted 800 people to become tour guides. Why? Because they could speak in English, they took a little bit of test, job done. And again, I met a lot of them. They're great, they're lovely, but being a tour guide, especially in a country as tricky as Saudi Arabia at the moment, where rules and regulations are changing almost on a daily basis, it's not ready. And to preempt anyone that says, I don't mind, I'm well traveled, I don't mind, just give me a local fixer, when I tell you that at the moment there is almost a set rate of $600 per guide per day, it becomes a little bit more difficult to be so blasé about guides. So give it time. If that's something you want to do, it will be possible, but please trust us when we say it's just not ready for it yet, but it will be there, and they're keen and they're eager to do it. With regards to food, actually much more varied than maybe you get in some other Gulf Arab states, and that's partly because it's such a big country, it's got influences from all around. So I had some fantastic Yemeni bread, influence from the south. From a kind of Saudi center, you've got lots of sweets which are made from dates. And we'll always try and have at least one meal inside someone's house, which I had the privilege of doing, which is obviously great. As you all know, you always get different food once you go to someone's house. But generally, when you go to restaurants, this is how Saudis eat. It's either private little cabins or it's private rooms with food laid out like this. It's just the way that it's done, and we will do at least some meals this way. There are some more traditional, or kind of I said, more Western restaurants as well, again with some excellent food. So we'll probably try and mix it up between the two as we go along. With regards to drinks, you can get some kind of great coffee coming from the region. Or if you want to get your kind of double shot espresso with your double latte, that is all available as well. I mean, really, you do have the extremes. And if you want to get your Dunkin' Donuts and your Domino Pizza, again, Saudis, they have it all. Question which I do get asked is, will I be able to get alcohol? Now, some of you may have friends or know people, or maybe you've even worked in Saudi and know that on some of the compounds, alcohol is quite widely available. You may also have heard stories of Saudi princes with apparently wine cellars and whiskey cabinets that would make other countries embarrassed by comparison. The reality is, at the moment, no. You won't be able to take alcohol into Saudi, and you won't be able to access alcohol while you are there. That may change. It is one of the things that's being discussed, and especially with the big project that Saudi is doing along the Red Sea, where they are planning on building 50 eco-resorts throughout their Red Sea coastline. There are rumors that they may allow alcohol to be ordered in rooms, in hotels, whatever. At the moment, it's not there. So just be warned. And then probably I'd say the biggest question that we've been asked over the last few months is women. What's it like for Saudi women, and what's it like as a woman to travel to Saudi Arabia? Obviously, I can only tell you so much, but I did travel with a couple of Western women, and we spoke about it a lot. So, as I've said before, this used to be mandated in law that women had to cover up. That is no longer the case. However, it is still tradition. So the vast majority of Saudi women that you will see will still be dressed with the abaya, with the niqab, with a headscarf. But you will see some dressed like this. Saudi women on the edge of the world with us, dressed as Western women would be in London or New York or anywhere. Both do exist. At the moment, the majority is more conservative, but it is changing. And this is Lena, my guide. And this, I would say, is very a good example of how things are at the moment. This was Lena when we went out on a boat trip on the Red Sea. And this is Lena when we went to a cafe in Jeddah. And she said, look, I will wear the clothing that I'm in the mood for, that I feel is most appropriate for me and for the occasion. She said, I don't need to make a choice. She goes, I can now choose whatever I want to wear, whenever I want to wear it. And it's my choice, and I'll do what I want to do. And in Jeddah, she was more comfortable wearing the headscarf, whereas out on the Red Sea, it was no problem at all. This was my guide in the old town of Jeddah, Abba. She was actually the first female Saudi to get a guiding license. And she was very funny. She said, look, she said, I'm a very well-educated woman. She said, because I choose to wear a headscarf, she was like, my brain doesn't stop working just because I'm wearing a headscarf. It works perfectly fine, thank you very much. And she said, it's my choice. She said, it's great that some women don't need to wear it anymore. She goes, for me, I would still like to. That was her choice. And then even within families, this was Miriam. She's one of the country's top free divers. And this is how she was dressed. And when we went snorkeling, she was just wearing a bikini. But that's her mum, Reem, who is a diving instructor. And she chose to wear a bikini. Both were existing in the same family. It was not an issue. So it's an interesting time that Saudi is going through. And as a Western woman, realistically, within reason, kind of wear whatever you want. Yes, you're not going to go with a skimpy little top and kind of hot pants, but you probably wouldn't anyway. But this was Lou over on the left, who I traveled with, one of the women, and she felt very, very comfortable letting her blonde hair down, traveling as she was. So to some extent, it's actually, I would say, more liberal than maybe some other countries in the region that we may have traveled to. And the overall message that I got from the Saudi women that I spoke to is that they were very happy with the freedoms and the progress that they were seeing, but they also liked the fact that it wasn't being enforced on them, that they had the choice as to how much of it or how little they could take, and that it was their choice as to move forward with it. So That was the overall situation with women. Now, with regards to coronavirus, Saudi Arabia hasn't escaped it like the rest of the world, but what they did do is they made the very sensible decision to clamp down very early on, and importantly, they stopped pilgrims coming to Mecca. And if anyone has seen images of the Hajj, if you think about it, it couldn't be a worse situation for the spreading of coronavirus. People coming in from all over the world in hot conditions, in close proximity, all mixing. So they've stopped that, which is quite a radical thing for them to do. So it does mean that they have managed to get a hold of the virus. They've only had 6,000 deaths, but considering their population is over half that of the UK, that has had over 50,000, by comparison, they're not doing too badly. What it does mean from a practical point of view is that at the moment, tourist visas are suspended. Now, I know probably some of you are booked or were booked to travel with us in October, November, December. Some of you may be booked to travel with us in January, February, March, and may be saying, will we be able to travel? The honest answer is, I hope so, but I don't know. The Saudi government is going to make a decision, apparently I'm told, in the next couple of weeks as to when they will start opening up for tourist visas again, and we will let you know and we will be in touch. They do plan to do it, but I will let you know when I can. And just overall, my my time in Saudi, it was great. I really enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I felt very privileged to be there, working at Wild Frontiers amongst both the staff and the clients, probably some of the best traveled people in the world. And yet I knew almost no one that had traveled to Saudi. So for me, that was just, I felt incredibly privileged to be able to do that. And I found people generally very well educated, well traveled, friendly, happy to engage. And I had a really good travel experience there. And to just leave you with one thought, my driver in Riyadh was a woman called Mona. She had she had 4 kids. Most of the kids were all at university age. She had a daughter who was studying at Brown University in Rhode Island. And I asked her, how she saw the country developing, with all this progress. Was it going to turn, into Europe? Was it going to be a kind of like another Dubai? And she just said, no. She said, we're going our own way. We will find our own way, and that will be ours. And she was looking forward to it. So that was it. That was my time in Saudi. Johnny, I will hand back to you.
Mark, thank you very much. My goodness me, what a fascinating talk. A country full of contradictions and extremes and change. It's absolutely fascinating. I'm very pleased to say, even though we've had more questions on this webinar than we have ever had, I think you've answered about 80% of them in your talk. It's very funny when a question comes in and, can you get him to talk about the food? Boom, you talk about the food. What about the accommodation? Boom, there's the accommodation. Right, so we are moving, we're running a little bit over, but don't worry. I think it was so fascinating. I'm sure we were all gripped, and we've had some really nice comments, Mark, about how fascinating that was. So before we move on to the Q&A, because there are still a few questions, I just want to quickly share my screen and tell you a couple of other few things. So yes, Christmas and New Year trips. We do have a few trips going for Christmas and New Year. You're going to need to get your skates on if you want to get away over Christmas. Slow boat to Aswan. This is a fantastic trip along the Nile on one of the luxury dahabeahs. I was lucky enough to do that trip about 3 Christmases ago and absolutely loved it. Beneath the Sands of Sudan, that leaves after Christmas, before New Year. So that's a great chance to go and see the pyramids and things down there in the Nubian desert. A real big adventure, that one. And then Guatemala, Tikal and beyond. That was our last webinar. One of my favorite countries. I was lucky enough to do that trip last Christmas. So those are 3 trips. Obviously, there are certain restrictions depending on where you're coming from, but essentially you can do those. And they're on the homepage of our website if you're trying to find them, or at the web address there below. If you just put Wild Frontiers Christmas, I'm sure you will get that on Google. The next thing to just mention is, I'm putting this into our webinars now. When we were in the world before COVID, we used to do these talks live at a place called the Frontline Club or the Royal Geographical Society in London. And the proceeds from the tickets that we would charge would go to the foundation, which enabled us to raise money for the really good causes that we support around the world. Obviously, we're not getting that at the moment, so I'm just throwing this out there that if anybody has enjoyed Marc's talk so much that they would like to make a small donation to the foundation, that would be fantastic. We have built and run a school in northern Pakistan. We have sponsored a girls' football team in Ethiopia. We have people supplied 2 rickshaws to the Pink City Rickshaw Company for women from lower income families to operate there as our guides. We've done all sorts of things and we continue to do so. So if you do feel like giving a little bit of money to that, that would be fantastic. Again, just Google Wild Frontiers Foundation and you will find it. We are also still on the £25 or $34 deposit scheme. That is going to run until at least the 1st of January. We're yet to decide whether we're going to put our deposits up after that point. And 10% on the tailor-made adventures that we put together for you. We still have our COVID promise, which basically says that if a trip can't run, you get a refund or you can rebook. And just briefly, our group tours, a maximum group size 12, that goes for all these Saudi trips as well. Tour leaders and local guides, interesting and comfortable accommodation and transport, full board on most, so nearly all meals are included. COVID health and safety policy in line with the World Tourism Council. Tailor-made travel. We have a full team of travel specialists, expert knowledge in their areas, flexible booking conditions, and we are ATOL protected. So Q&A. I'm just going to quickly answer one myself because it came in from actually anonymous, but it was to say, will we be putting on trips later in 2021? And the answer to that is yes, we've already got them on the website. So do go to the Saudi page on the website, look under dates and prices, and you will see a number of trips going all the way through 2021 and 2022, which are all now live. So if you can't go this year, sorry, when I say this year, if you can't go next year, you can even book up for 2022. Right, Marc, as I say, you rather skillfully actually took the thunder from most of these questions, but I do still have a few. So the first one regarding the food, I have a question from Kate and another from Alison regarding being a vegan traveler or gluten-free as a celiac. I know from my own experience in the Middle East, this can be a little bit different. What would your take be on those?
We'll cope. I mean, you'll find there is a variety of food available. So for vegan, there's some great, fresh produce, some great fruit and vegetables are always available. You'll find beans and bread, not great for gluten intolerant, but there's rice. Honestly, there may be some, you've seen a way a lot of the meals are presented. There will be certain dishes which may be unavailable to you, but there will always be enough. It's a country of 33 million. There's 10 million expats in the country. So although tourism itself hasn't yet developed to the extent like it might do in Southeast Asia, where you can get your soy milk of various things, there is still quite a sophisticated kind of culinary market there as well. So yeah, we'll cope. But I can't tell you exactly what dishes because we haven't yet run a tour with a vegan or a gluten-free person, but we will work it out.
Good. Okay. Marnie has asked, is photography restricted in any way?
No, obviously there's common sense. So you don't take photographs, as you in most places, of military installations. And then just getting common sense, not just in Saudi Arabia, you wouldn't just go up to someone and start snapping away, especially, but generally you saw some of the photographs I was able to get. Most people, if you ask them, will either politely say no, or they'll be very happy to say yes. So no major restrictions.
Great. Again, we've been asked this a bit and you've kind of covered it to some extent, but to what extent is the itinerary dictated by the government? And this is Romy and Suzanne are kind of asking this question. Is it possible to have real conversations, meet real people, which of course is so fundamentally important to us at Wild Frontiers as well? Yeah, I mean, can you, for example, walk along the Corniche in Jeddah, bump into local people and chat to them?
Yeah, it's surprisingly, for anyone that has been to, I mean, Iran is one of my favorite countries, but as you may know, if you're British, American or Canadian, if you want to, for example, stay out an extra couple of days onto a group tour, you have to have a guide assigned to you in Iran. That's not true in Saudi. So you are free to go wherever you want. You're free to talk to whoever you want to. It is worth saying that a lot of the Saudis that I met were very friendly, but it is still generally quite a private society. So, for example, in the restaurants, while there were always other people around, there was always a bigger queue of people getting takeaways to take home to eat their food at home with the family. So it is maybe slightly more challenging than in other destinations to always be able to access. But there are definite areas, you know, when I was in Riyadh, when I was in Jeddah, it wasn't a problem at all. And a lot of the guides that you do have access to were quite open to talk about their family life. You know, I went for dinner with Reem and Mariam at their house, and we were very happy. We went out with their friends, she came round, we went. So it is, there are things that definitely can be done. The other thing that's just worth mentioning as well is because Saudis are so generally well-travelled and well-educated, it's great for access, and so you will find English quite widely spoken, but balanced with that is you're probably not as interesting to them as maybe if you go to more closed countries, maybe like Iran, where fewer people have had the opportunity to travel. So obviously it is a little bit of a balance. From my point of view, I definitely had a really good balance of being able to meet some people, to really feel like I could have those good conversations, but also being slightly surprised on some occasions that, okay, this is a different country. It does operate in a slightly more private way than might be ideal in a perfect world.
Okay, Romy also asks, as she is the patron of the Wild Camel Protection Foundation, will she be able to ride a camel?
Possibly. I've heard that Al-Ulah, it's something that they are introducing. It's just really hard to get up-to-date information. So when I was there, the answer would be no, but it is something which I've seen, at least in marketing intentions, that yes, that will be something that will be available at some stage.
Great. Okay. Mike is asking, can Saudi be combined with any other countries in the Middle East? And in fact, you might want to put that with Brendan, who's also asked, what extensions would you suggest pre and post tour, given that, as you've just said, you are able to do that in Saudi?
Yeah, you can do it. Again, I'm going to be a little bit reluctant just because of this whole issue with regards to tourism being so new and the lack of decent, reliable, tailor-made guides. So we will definitely have those conversations with people that want to do more. And like I said, you can go to the south. There are options in Jeddah. It's a little bit tricky, but you can do snorkeling and diving. But it is going to be something to watch as well, because you may have read about, again, the Red Sea is going to be developing, and they want to do something distinctly different from Egypt. They've looked over the other side and they've gone, we don't want to do Hurghada, we don't want to do Sharm el-Sheikh. So they are getting in, and I think probably within the next year or two, we will start to see some, very high level resorts growing, and with that is coming the training and the guide. So give it time, it will come. Beyond that, just spending an extra day or so in Jeddah would be great. You could easily spend some time just wandering around the old city. There's a museum in Jeddah which you can pretty much spend the entire day exploring. So there's definitely opportunities there. And one of the things that we will look at, again, not yet because it's still too early, but you will be able to hopefully drive over the border from Jordan. And that could be a really interesting routing coming down through Wadi Rum, following the extension of that right the way into northwestern Saudi Arabia. So these are all things which with time we will develop, but just from a pure little extension, I would say almost keep it minimal for now, and come back at another time when we can definitely give you more realistic stuff.
I guess other than just picking any one of the Gulf states who you could use and fly in and out of those. Okay, great. Emma is asking about whether there's any segregation between the male and female members of a group separated by sex. So, you know, if you're in a particular museum or something, women having to go one way and guys the other, none of that?
Western women are generally considered almost like a third sex. And in a way, they're in a unique position because they're 100% able to interact with, obviously, Western men and Saudi men, but they're also able to freely access Saudi female-only areas, which are in more traditional areas out of limits for Western men. So there's a really good book written by an American journalist called Karen House. I'll ask Mike to include a link to it in the email tomorrow. And she has spent, you know, decades in Saudi Arabia, and she talks a lot about this, that as a Western woman, she's actually in this unique position to access both worlds. But no, from a practical point of view, there's nowhere that a Western woman can't go.
Actually, Sally has asked, and this is a job for you for tomorrow, Mark, can perhaps update the reading list after having done this talk?
Can I actually throw it out there as well? If anyone's got any good recommendations, I've been looking. Like I said, that was for me was my favourite one. But if anyone's read anything that they would recommend, please send them through, and we can include that on the email that goes out.
Yes. Okay. Cool. I've had a question from Alison, which kind of ties in with one from Michelle in New York, who asked, are things generally expensive? A coffee, a beer, we can't get one of those, obviously. And Alison says, what about tipping and extra costs? You know, what kind of, presumably because most things are included, other than tipping, perhaps you don't need that much money for this trip.
Yeah, I mean, the trip is full board, so it will just be extras. Yes, it's expensive, but it's not, I would say, from what I experienced, a lot of it, I would say, was London expensive rather than Scandinavia expensive. Okay. So obviously you've got the range, and there are certain things which just, like I said, the guiding fee, which is something which obviously doesn't really affect you unless you're going for tailor-made. Obviously, it's something that we absorb within the cost of the trip. But there are certain things, certain vehicle hire, which again kind of, you know, affects us, that are just, you're like, what, when you're comparing it to other countries in the region. But generally, for the rest of it, no, it's London pricing rather than super crazy.
Okay, Andy asks, what's the typical drive time on each day and the max on the tour?
Generally, there are some big distances to cover. The average, I would say, on driving days, you're looking at about 4 hours.
Okay, cool. Not too bad. And how hot is it in the winter months? When you were there in January, what kind of temperatures were you talking? That's Ali asking that.
But this is a tricky one because you're going from Jeddah to Al-Ulah to Riyadh. You do get quite a range. So Jeddah, when I was there, was mid to late 20s. Riyadh was around kind of 15. Sorry, this is centigrade for anyone that's coming from America. I'm not really good at kind of converting. And Al-Ulah, because it is high altitude, it was beautiful, crisp days, but it got, you know, very cold at night as well. So you've got to kind of, you know, allow for all. There's never going to be a time where you will get kind of perfect weather conditions. You know, if you're just I just like kind of a nice 20 degrees, you'll never get that as you travel around. So you have to be prepared a little bit for a variety of temperature as you travel.
Great. And just one more question, Mark. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but let's see your answer. It's to do with some of the sites being closed, and I know that Meydan Salah was closed for a while. you obviously got to see it. I assume that by the time our trips do go there, they will be open.
Yeah, in Vision 2030, in this tourism project, they opened Al-Ulah for the winter festival, which is when I was there, but then they closed it when the festival finished, which I think was maybe the end of February. And the plan was to reopen everything on the 30th of October. And for those of you that may have been booked on our trip, you may recognize that date because that was the date that our first trip was due to depart. There have been a couple of delays, partly mainly due to coronavirus, but I'm getting a report next week as to exactly what is open and what's not. Most things are open and functioning. I've got someone on the ground there who's going around, and most things are open. A couple of things are slightly behind schedule, but by the time that Saudi reopens for tourism, I'm pretty sure everything will be open, but I'll be able to update people if there is any one particular site which may or may not be open. We'll update you at the time.
Marc, that was fabulous. I've had an awful lot of comments here on both the chat and the Q&A just saying that that was really fascinating. You've whetted a lot of people's appetite, answered a lot of questions. It really, for someone like me that's been to over 100 countries, I was sitting here on the edge of my seat as well. So thank you very much for that. Thank you everybody who came and listened to Marc give this excellent presentation on Saudi Arabia. If you do have any more questions, you know what to do. Please just email us at info@wildfrontiers.co.uk and we will get back to you as quickly as we can. So thank you all very much and good evening and stay safe. Thank you.
Bye.